Maxwell Thornton adjusted his $5,000 suit, looking at Daniel Whitman with the detached boredom of a man swatting a fly. At 29, Maxwell held the title of Vice President of Strategic Overview, a role created entirely by his father, William. Daniel, 52 and graying at the temples, sat across from him. He had been the lead system architect since the company was a three-person garage operation. "The board is looking for agile synergy, Daniel," Maxwell drawled, spinning a heavy gold pen. "Your legacy systems are a bottleneck. We're moving the architecture to a proprietary cloud-based AI stack. Your services are no longer required. Effective immediately." Daniel didn't flinch. He looked at the sleek, glass-walled office that overlooked the London skyline. He thought of William Thornton, currently tucked away in a quiet retirement manner, who had once called Daniel the iron skeleton of the firm. Maxwell, however, only saw a line item that needed deleting. "I built the core kernels that run every transaction in this firm, Maxwell," Daniel said quietly. "The legacy you're trashing is the only reason this building is still standing." Maxwell laughed, a sharp, unearned sound. "The world moves on, Dan. Security will escort you out. Leave the iPad and the badge." Daniel stood up slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply reached into his briefcase, pulled out a faded, physical copy of his original 1998 employment contract, and tucked it under his arm. The first week of Daniel's absence was deceptively quiet. Maxwell held a visionary transition gala, toasted to the future, and officially launched the migration to the new AI-driven platform. He wanted to prove that his father's old guard was a weight around the company's neck. But deep in the server rooms, the iron skeleton began to groan. Daniel hadn't planted a virus. He didn't need to. He had simply stopped being the manual override for a system that was never designed to run without a soul. Back in his small home office, Daniel opened a bottle of scotch and laid out his contract. He turned to page 12. There, highlighted in yellow ink that had faded over 3 decades, was Clause 3.4c. When William Thornton was desperate for a genius to build his empire, he had signed a deal that no modern HR department would ever allow. It wasn't about severance or stock options. It was about intellectual property, specifically the foundational logic gates upon which the entire corporate infrastructure sat. Daniel's phone buzzed. It was a frantic text from a former junior dev. "The API is throwing 500 errors. The new stack can't talk to the ledger. We're losing 100,000 pounds a minute. Maxwell is screaming." Daniel took a sip of his drink. He wasn't in a hurry. He knew exactly what was coming. By Tuesday, the strategic overview was a disaster. The firm's proprietary trading floor had gone dark. The new AI stack Maxwell insisted on was trying to access the core database, but it was being met with a "permission denied" prompt that no one on the current tech team could bypass. Maxwell called Daniel. Daniel didn't answer. Maxwell called again. Daniel let it go to voicemail. On the third call, Daniel picked up. "Whitman," he said. "Daniel, there's a glitch in the migration," Maxwell shouted. He sounded frantic, the veneer of the cool executive stripped away. "The systems are locked. My guys say there's an encryption layer they can't crack. Fix it, and I'll double your severance." "It's not a glitch, Maxwell," Daniel replied, his voice calm and steady. "And it's not a severance issue. Have you read my original contract? Specifically, Clause 3.4c. I don't have time for legal trivia. Just give us the bypass. I can't, Daniel said. Clause 3.4c states that the kernel architecture remains the personal intellectual property of the architect. In the event of involuntary termination without just cause, the license to use that architecture is revoked within 72 hours. You fired me for synergy, Maxwell. That's not just cause. You are currently trespassing on my private digital property. The silence on the other end of the line was expensive. Every second of it cost the Thornton empire thousands of pounds. Maxwell's legal team spent the next 6 hours frantically reviewing the 1998 document. They emerged pale and sweating. William Thornton, in his zeal to keep Daniel in the early days, had granted him veto rights over any system modifications that utilized his core code. It was a digital land lease. Daniel Whitman didn't just work for the company, he owned the ground it was built on. "We'll sue!" Maxwell screamed in the boardroom. "He's holding the company hostage." "Actually, sir," the head of legal whispered, "he's not holding us hostage. He simply stopped lending us his tools. Under British IP law, if we continue to run the servers without his express permission, he can file an injunction to shutter the entire operation. We'd be forced to wipe every drive containing his logic gates." Maxwell looked at the monitors. The red numbers were climbing. They were down 40 million pounds since the morning. "Get him in here," Maxwell hissed. "Now." "He won't come to the office, sir," the lawyer replied. "He says he's retired. He suggested we meet at his favorite pub in Greenwich. And he mentioned one more thing. He wants your father to be there." The Old Shepherd pub was a far cry from the glass towers of the city. William Thornton arrived in a Bentley, leaning heavily on a cane. He looked every bit his 79 years, but his eyes were still sharp as flint. Daniel was already there, a pint of bitter on the table, and his iPad Pro open to a complex map of the company's network. Maxwell arrived last, looking disheveled, his expensive tie crooked. "Sit down, Max," William commanded. The son obeyed instantly. William looked at Daniel and sighed. "I told him not to touch the architecture, Dan. I told him you were the one man who knew where the bones were buried." "You did, William," Daniel said respectfully. "But your son wanted strategic overview. He thought the bones were just clutter." "I did what was best for the future," Maxwell burst out. "We can't be beholden to one man's ancient code." "It's not ancient," Daniel said, turning his iPad around. "It's foundational. And according to Clause 3.4c, as of 4 p.m. today, I am issuing a cease and desist. I am withdrawing my permission for Thornton Financial to use my patented logic gates. Your new AI has nothing to sit on. By midnight, your entire network will be a collection of very expensive paperweights." "What do you want?" Maxwell spat. "Money? $1 million? $5? Daniel laughed. "I've been your top earner for 20 years, Maxwell. I have plenty of money. This isn't about a payout." "Then what?" "I want the strategic overview abolished," Daniel said. "And I want a formal admission of incompetence signed by you to be distributed to the board. But more importantly, I want the patent rights for the new AI stack you just built." Maxwell gasped. "That's a 50 million pound asset. It's the company's future." "No," Daniel corrected. It's a parasite. It's a piece of software that was built using my proprietary kernels as a host. Without my permission, your AI is a copyright violation. I can either let you keep it and watch the courts order you to delete it, or you can sign the rights over to me and I'll lease it back to the company for a nominal fee." William Thornton chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. He looked at his son with a mixture of pity and sternness. "He has you, Max. He has you by the throat, and he's being a gentleman about it. I'd have asked for your seat." Maxwell's face turned a deep, bruised purple. He looked at the clock. It was 6 p.m. The midnight deadline was looming. The tension in the pub was thick enough to choke on. Maxwell looked at his father, hoping for a reprieve, a legal loophole, or a burst of old-school ruthlessness. But William Thornton just sipped his water, watching the scene like a spectator at a play he'd already seen the ending to. "You're asking me to hand over the keys to the kingdom," Maxwell whispered. "No," Daniel said, sliding a document across the sticky wooden table. "I'm asking you to pay the rent for the kingdom you've been living in for free. You thought I was an employee. I was a partner you forgot to acknowledge." Daniel tapped a command on his iPad. Instantly, Maxwell's phone began to vibrate. It was the CTO. "Max, the Corps is starting to purge. We just lost the London trade logs. Did you sign it? Did you fix it?" I'm looking at the papers now," Maxwell stammered. "Sign it, Maxwell," William said, his voice dropping an octave. "Or I will come out of retirement, fire you myself for gross negligence, and sign it for you. At least this way you keep your title, though we both know it will be empty." With a trembling hand, Maxwell Thornton, the man who wanted to revolutionize the future, signed the paper that gave his architect control over it. As soon as the ink was dry, Daniel's fingers flew across the iPad. He didn't just turn the lights back on. He executed a series of scripts that integrated the new AI stack directly into his own private server environment. Thornton Financial's future was now officially hosted on Daniel Whitman's personal infrastructure. Back at the office, the monitors flickered from red to green. The 500 errors vanished. The trading floor roared back to life, but the data was different now. Every byte of information passing through the firm now bore a tiny, invisible digital watermark. Property of D. Whitman. Maxwell stood up, trying to regain some shred of dignity. "I hope you're happy. You've crippled my vision." "Your vision was a house of cards, Maxwell," Daniel said, closing his iPad. "I just gave it a foundation. The difference is, I own the deed to the basement." Daniel stood up and nodded to William. "Good to see you, Bill. Give my best to the board when you tell them about the new licensing fees." Daniel walked out of the pub and into the cool Greenwich air, leaving the two Thorntons, the past and the failed future, sitting in the dim light of a dying afternoon. The following Monday was not the new era Maxwell had envisioned. The board of directors had received Daniel's statement of incompetence, which Maxwell had been forced to sign to save the company from immediate blackout. The room was cold. William Thornton sat at the head of the table, though he held no official power. The directors looked at Maxwell like he was a contagion. "So," the lead director began, "let me summarize. We no longer own our core operating system. We do not own the AI stack we spent 3 years developing. And we are currently paying a monthly consultancy fee to a man we fired last week that exceeds the CEO's salary?" Maxwell tried to straighten his shoulders. "It was a legal ambush, a legacy clause from 30 years ago. A clause you should have read before you handed him a pink slip," William interrupted. The board didn't care about Maxwell's strategic overview anymore. They cared about the bottom line. Daniel Whitman had calculated the licensing fee to be exactly 1 penny less than the cost of rebuilding the entire system from scratch. It was a mathematical cage. Daniel didn't stay away for long. He returned to the building on Wednesday, not as an employee, but as the chairman of Whitman Logic Systems. He wore a simple sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to the sea of suits. He walked straight into his old office. Maxwell was still there, packing a few boxes. "You're in my chair," Daniel said mildly. "This is still my office, Whitman," Maxwell snapped. "I'm still the VP." "Check the morning memo, Max," Daniel said, leaning against the doorframe. "As part of the restructuring, Whitman Logic Systems has taken a 15% equity stake in Thornton Financial in lieu of the first year's licensing fees. I'm the new majority consultant with veto power over all infrastructure-related personnel." Daniel smiled. It wasn't a mean smile. It was the smile of a man who had finally finished a very difficult puzzle. "I'm keeping you on, Maxwell. You're going to be my junior liaison. You wanted to learn about strategic overview? Well, you're going to start by learning how to document every single line of code in the legacy system you hated so much." For the next month, Maxwell Thornton lived a nightmare. He was no longer giving speeches at tech summits. Instead, he was sitting in a windowless room, forced to perform a manual forensic audit of the very systems he had tried to delete. Daniel was a demanding consultant. Every time Maxwell made a mistake, Daniel would point it out with a calm, surgical precision that was more painful than shouting. "You missed a logic gate in the VAT breakdown, Maxwell," Daniel would say, looking over his shoulder. "That's a £2 million error in simulation. Do it again." Maxwell was learning, for the first time in his life, what it actually took to build something. He saw the brilliance in Daniel's ancient code, the way it handled billions of operations with the elegance of a symphony. He realized that while he had been playing with titles, Daniel had been holding the world together. One evening, William Thornton walked into the audit room. He saw his son, sleeves rolled up, eyes bloodshot, staring at a screen of raw C++ code. "How's the overview going, son?" William asked. Maxwell didn't look up. It's complicated, Dad. I had no idea it was this deep." A year later, Thornton Financial was more profitable than ever. The Whitman-Thornton partnership had become a model of stability. Daniel had eventually returned the IP to the company, but only after Maxwell had proven he actually understood the value of the work. Maxwell was still the VP, but he was a changed man. He no longer talked about disruption without first talking about durability. On the day of Daniel's actual retirement, a real one this time, by choice, they stood on the balcony of the penthouse office. "Why didn't you just burn it down, Dan?" Maxwell asked. "You could have destroyed the company. You had the power." Daniel looked out at the city he had helped keep running for 30 years. "I'm a system architect, Maxwell. My job isn't to destroy systems. It's to make sure they work. Even if I have to break the builder to fix the building." Daniel handed Maxwell a small, leather-bound book. "That's the master key to the 3.4C encryption. Don't lose it. And for heaven's sake, Max, read the fine print before you hire your successor.